Well guys, here we are. This is the beginnings of the Ligonier Valley Railroad. You see we have some bench work together and a little bit of road bed started. I'll show you some more details on how the bench work went together and how the Spline Road Bed works. This is a homosote spline and it is in the early stages here going together. You can see it is somewhat incomplete down at this end. It's coming together nicely. It leaves us a very open scenery base so that we're not restricted to trying to make flat sections look like they're not flat. We'll go down to this end and I'll show you the cross section of our bench work. This is an L-girder bench work we're using, which as you can see is very lumber efficient. The L-girders are made, here's the end view, with a 1x3 vertical and 1x2 on top. Those are glued and screwed together. We have two of them and they're spaced about 18 inches apart. This first section we made with a 6-foot L-girder. Actually two L-girders, one for the back and one for the front. We spaced the rear one about 6 inches off the wall, put the front one 18 inches ahead of that. Made a set of legs that are made similar to the L-girders with a 1x3 and a 1x2 screwed to the side. In this case, the 1x2 is screwed to the face of the 1x3 instead of to the edge. It gives us a pretty wide footprint at the bottom. See if I can get an angle to show that. It gives us a nice stable footprint, and at the top we have the 1x3 extended up past the 1x2, so we actually have about a 2.5 by 2.5 inch square face screwed to the L-girder. We also have a simple 1x3 cross member tying the two legs together that establishes our spacing. As you see further down, there's actually no angle bracing on this yet. There will be angle bracing added. So far it really hasn't seemed to be a necessity. I've waited on the angle bracing because I need to have some access underneath the layout to get at things like laying track towards the rear of the layout. So I don't want to block that space until I have to. Which you can see, it's actually very rigid, both directions. We'll add a leg out here. This is actually 4 feet from the wall that we stick out here at this curve. So I'm going to add an L-girder and another leg here just to stabilize this area. It's actually pretty good, but if you push down on it, you can tip it a little. That's a lot of overhang. On top of the L-girders, we have 1x2 cross members or joists. These cross members are actually screwed from below into the 1x2 portion of the L-girder. The cross members are not glued. The reason they're not glued is if we have to move one or pull one out, if we want to do some changes to the layout later, we can take 2 screws out and we can move that whole piece. Those will support the risers for the Spline Road Bed. It'll allow us a very easy to work with and modify layout in the future because everything will be accessible from below. The only parts that are actually glued are the L-girders themselves and the legs. The benchwork was built in sections, this first section being 6 feet long. You'll see it has a full set of legs under it. There's a second section that runs from that splice plate to this splice plate There's actually an add-on. There's no legs under that one at all. We have another 6-foot section down here at the end that's on a full set of legs. Now oftentimes you'll see layouts built with one set of legs on a section and then one set of legs on the next section, so that each section has one set of legs and supports the section next to it. One of the disadvantages of building a layout in that fashion is that if you ever have to move it, as you're taking the layout apart, you're stuck with trying to balance one end while unbolting the other end. It's fairly awkward. It sounds good in practice until you actually do it. With this layout, you can see where our joint is between the two sections. We actually have our joists to support the road bed. We're kept back 4 inches on each side. That gives us a little bit more room to separate the track and the scenery without having to have joists butted right against each other and cutting right on a tight line. If we need to remove this section, we can remove the screws from 1/2 of that splice plate, both front and back. You'll notice the back splice plates are away from the wall, so the screws are easy to access. If we remove the screws on the section that's in between the legs, we can do it on each side, and the splice plates will actually support that section right here on the L girder. So the screws can be removed after the scenery is cut. It can be lifted out in one piece. If we did do that, this section would still stand just as it sits now, because it has a full set of legs. This section along here was built just like the 6-foot sections, but it was made 8 feet long. And in the corners, though it's not required to support it, we put 2 angle brackets, or big L brackets that we made, and we screwed them together just to keep everything aligned. And at this end, we have another 6-foot section built the same as the rest. Though we did need some longer L brackets just to keep things tied together and lined up. The spacing of the cross braces is 16 inches on center. Again, on all the sections I stayed 4 inches back from the end to place the first one and went 16 inches from there, which came out in some pretty even spacing. Now here we could take a closer look at this road bed. This is a spline road bed. It's actually made of 3 pieces of 1/2 inch homosote that were cut 1.5 inches wide and screwed together. This stuff bends pretty well, but for tighter radiuses it helps if you wet it. I actually wet it in a sink, a big sink like in a shop where you'd wash hands, kind of like a sprinkler. So you can get it pretty wet without being soaked. But even when it's wet, if you want to bend it, you have to do it gently, because it's actually a paper product. It's a compressed paper that's used for soundproofing. It'll give us a very nice, quiet road bed that's very smooth. You don't need any cork on top of this, but when you bend it, you're stretching those paper fibers a little bit, so you need to work it a little bit. Be gentle with it so it doesn't snap on you. I learned that the hard way. One thing that you'll notice that's a great advantage to using this type of spline road bed is that there's no seams. All the seams in these individual pieces, such as right here, are staggered. In this case, they're over 1 foot apart from this one right here. It comes along to right here, and the next seam, you can see it started to break right there just a little, is actually way down here. As you form these pieces into a curve and you screw it together, I do it about every 4 inches, every 8 inches on one side and every 8 inches on the other, except for where I have a seam, and then I try to get them just on each side of the seam. As you screw it together, in this curve, it'll hold its shape quite nicely. It has a little bit of flex in case you need to work it into the curve you want. But it's holding its shape, and it's virtually one piece of road bed all the way around this reverse loop, coming down to the corner here. You see we added some pieces where a turnout is going to go. The track will separate here, and our other end of our reverse loop as it comes around comes in here, and all three tracks come right together. As you put this together, you have to sand it a little bit to get these tops nice and smooth and flush. And I like to use a 1/2-inch spacer where I have tracks running parallel to each other. That gives us a 2-inch spacing between the tracks. You could put a little wider shim in there if you need a little wider spacing. These tracks are running straight where they're parallel, so we don't have too much of a concern with long cars overhanging. There's a little bit of a curve down at the end here, but we're going to be running primarily 40-foot freight cars and a few 60-foot passenger cars, so we don't have the overhang problem that you'd have with 85-footers. Now down at this end, you can see we're not complete, but you can just build this in as you need to go. We have a switch that will be going right down in this area, so we will just extend some pieces into here and screw it together. I said I was screwing both sides. If you look here, you're going to wonder, how am I going to put screws in on this back side? Well, it's pretty flexible. I can lift it right up, put the screws in the back, set it back down. That brings up another thing you'll notice. There are no risers under this road bed. Well, there's not yet. The risers will screw to the 1x2s down below here, and they'll hold this up at whatever elevation we need. There is a track in the back that we have just up on some temporary risers as I was screwing it together. That way we have the incline built into our curve. We come around, we're going to start coming up some risers, and you see we drop down to just 2 pieces here, and even just 1, because we need to continue that on. And it will curve back around above these tracks. As I get the risers in, start right here with these straight tracks, and that's going to establish the height for the rest of the layout. These tracks will sit about 1.5 inches above the joists below. We'll raise them up that high, and the riser will sit just underneath the road bed. It'll screw in from below. We don't need to add any cork on top of this. We can lay the track directly on here. We can bevel the edge a little, and we can ballast right there. As we go down through the reverse loop, the plan, as we come around the back, is to add a hidden staging yard here. And then we'll have about 6 feet to fit that in. Maybe just a little more. Using the Spline Road Bed, it's actually very easy to work with once you get started. It looks a little difficult only because we're not used to it. We're used to cutting up big sheets of plywood and laying them on the top of the table, drawing where the track goes and cutting it out. Here, once you get a few pieces together, you just bend them where you want the track to go. It's very easy to visualize. It's easy to change elevations. You can, as I've done here, you can put half of the layout together and not have anything screwed down, just float it around a little bit. You can use some clamps in those risers to get an idea of the height you want to go. If you get down here, like in this corner, where we came pretty close to the edge, and my plan was to have a profile board come in here and curve over to here. It looks like I could use a little longer joist right here. It's really only a matter of 2 screws, one located here and one located behind the back here. They both go straight up from below. I can slide that out, put a longer one in.